Let's suppose that you were able every night to dream any dream you wanted to dream. And that you could, for example, have the power within one night to dream 75 years of time, or any length of time you wanted to have. And you would naturally, as you began on this adventure of dreams, you would fulfill all your wishes. You would have every kind of pleasure you could conceive. And after several nights of 75 years of total pleasure each, you would say, well, that was pretty great. But now let's have a surprise. Let's have a dream which isn't under control. Well, something is going to happen to me that I don't know what it's going to be. And then you would get more and more adventurous, and you would make further and further out gambles as to what you would dream. And finally, you would dream where you are now.
Hi everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Paratalk. And on this episode I have Brennan back from the Ghost Story guys. Now, it's been a while since Brennan's been on. I think it's about 2 years. So we got lots to catch up on, and I'm going to ask him lots of questions. So without further ado, hello Brennan, how are you, mate?
I'm good, man. I'm good. Thanks for having me back. I've been looking forward to this.
Yeah, it's been a while. 2 years, is it?
November 2022, so about a year and a bit. It feels longer though. Everything currently feels both like it's happening at warp speed and also on a glacial scale. I don't understand what is happening. Maybe that's just me.
No, it's not just you. It's me as well. It's the world's gone mad. So yeah, I don't know. It's everything's a bit bonkers right now, and just wake up. I'm glad to wake up every day, with a smile on my face. But what was I going to say? So how have you been? What have you been up to? And more importantly, how's the podcast going?
Podcast is good. We opened up a new sort of side show, because the Ghost Story Guys has always been a bi-weekly storytelling show. Just because, one, it's a lot of work to put together a show, and two, I just don't think people would actually want. They think they might want the main show every week, but I don't know. I think that would get boring. I know I would get bored. But Paul and I started doing this show called Talk Spooky to Me, which is sort of like it comes out every other week, but it's a mail show. So we'll read listener mail, we'll kind of respond to it. And we've also started interviewing people, which has been a lot of fun. Sometimes we don't do it on every show, but we've had Luke Phillips, the author of Rogue, the Sasquatch action horror novel. We had him on. We had Ruth Roper Wilde, of course, UK ghost archivist extraordinaire recently. And so it's just an opportunity for us to do something a little bit different within the Ghost Story Guys sphere. So we're still literally talking spooky stuff, but we're not breaking the format of the main show, which is just a straight up first person storytelling show. And it kind of gives us an opportunity to, just hang out with some different people, hear some different perspectives. And we got really lucky recently. We had Derek Hayes and David Flora on to talk about their new documentary, Shadows in the Desert. You and I were chatting about this briefly off air, this idea that, it's hard to compete in the paranormal documentary space or the ghost show space, because there's so much nonsense, right? People are just so quick to fake things in order for clicks. They'll make up the most inane crap, and then they'll post some YouTube thumbnail of them looking terrified, and all that really happened is maybe it rained particularly hard outside, or their buddy Jez was down the hall banging on something with a pipe. Talking to those guys, their new documentary, they didn't do that, and it was nice actually having like an adult conversation about the paranormal where there's no BS, there's nothing made up. and then I just think it's a rare thing. And doing Talk Spooky has given us the opportunity to do that.
You touched on something there regarding, shall we say, the paranormal stratosphere of ghost hunting, where it is very competitive and it is very very saturated, where everyone seems to be doing their thing, but obviously looking at what other people are doing and going, how can I better that? There's a channel there that's doing a certain thing and they're getting a haunting every week or whatever, and how can I better that? Well, I'm going to do every 3 days and I'm going to go to every house and something's going to happen. And I don't think it's their fault, not fully their fault. I do think it's the fault of mainstream TV, where you have certain shows where over here there were shows which were on TV quite regular, got quite big, and over there, in your neck of the woods and the States, they've got their fair share. And I think that the media push that kind of thing for things to happen all the time. So it's kind of natural where people have YouTube channels and they think, well, that's what people want. We've got to make that stuff happen. But yeah, it is getting a bit out of hand at the moment. It is getting a bit sort of crazy, don't you think?
Oh yeah, I very much so, and I think as all these platforms have proliferated, there's more and more competition, right? Like, remember that whole Dear David? There was that whole thing on Twitter a couple of years back. This guy, it was called Dear David, and this guy was allegedly documenting all these paranormal happenings in his house, and it all just turned out to be fiction that he sold to a movie studio for a particularly terrible movie. And I can't tell you how many emails we get from people who send us TikToks, and they're well-meaning people, right? They're not being difficult. They're not trying to scam us. They are seeing this material being produced on TikTok, and they're saying, well, what do you think? Do you think this is real? Like, check this out. It's crazy. And of course, there's just no way it is. There's just no way, because the odds of someone, I shouldn't say there's just no way. It's always possible. Sometimes things get caught on camera. That happens. But if someone has, a haunting in their house and their entire account is structured around it, it's just so impossible to believe that it can be real, because that's, as you and I know, that's not how these things work.
Yeah.
But again, there's just, every platform has it, and I'm not singling out TikTok. I know there's sort of this tendency right now in North America to target TikTok for many and varied reasons, but every platform has this, and if you want the clicks, reasoned research is just not going to get you the attention you need. Again, there's people like Zelia Edgar who are doing really well-informed, well-researched videos. You've got, your show, you've got Supernatural Circumstances with Mike Brown and Morgan Knudsen, where they're actually taking the time to try and dissect these things. And they're doing very well, but at the same time, I just think the clicks go to the people who are willing to go over the top and who don't care about their integrity as long as they're getting paid. And do I think it's the fault of the many and varied platforms? Yeah, I do. But I think it's on the audience too, right? I think the audience has to reckon with their choices, and because ultimately they're the ones who are clicking on these things. If you can either click on say one of Zelia's videos and listen to a very thorough investigation of a particular sighting, or you can click on some jackwagon who's strung up a bunch of fishing wire around his apartment and is dragging things around and pretending like he's being haunted by a poltergeist. And sadly, a lot of the majority of people, which again is not meant as a slight to researchers like Zelia, but the majority of people are going to go for the more dynamic entertainment. And again, that's their fault. I don't think that we can blame the platforms necessarily for that.
I have noticed that there are a lot of channels, as I said earlier, there's a lot of channels that have popped up in the last few years which do have that kind of instant fix where, we're going to go into a haunted house and, what was that? Or some door slamming. Oh, quick, let's run out. Oh, it's got my arm. It's that sort of thing. And I think people crave that sort of stuff. They want to be scared. But you get somebody that says, well, I'm going to do a presentation on YouTube and I'm going to make this video and I'm going to show you pictures and tell you about it. People are like, oh, I can't be bothered. I can't be bothered watching all that. It's half an hour long, So, I do think it's quite sad when there are people out there that do present stuff and do create something, lay it out and do research. It's very difficult to sort of punch through the well, through the noise, really, because it's two different things. The paranormal has kind of splintered off into all these different factions. There's a lot of infighting as well. I've noticed. I try to stay out of it and away from it. Everyone's got an idea or a thought of what might be going on with all stuff like the paranormal, UFOs, whatever their thing might be. But I'm not the person to come along and go, I've got the answers, I know what it is, buy my course. I'm not that person, but there is a lot of that out there, and I do think that for the people that are really doing the research, it must make it incredibly frustrating, don't you think?
Oh, I imagine so. I mean, I'm not even doing the research, and I think it's frustrating. And now I understand, I'm not an expert. I tell stories. Now, I try to tell stories that I think are real. And I've done a lot of research, and I listen to my co-host Paul, who is a veritable fount of information on the subject. So I trust his opinion, and I trust the things he directs me to. But it is my opinion that whatever it is we're actually dealing with, man, is so fundamentally unfathomable that there's almost no point in trying to wrap our heads around it. Because I don't think it's demons. I don't think demons are real. I mean, is it possible there are unseen things? If we accept, for example, there's an unseen world, and that there are levels to consciousness, to existence that we don't readily have access to. Okay, so we're going to accept that, and then we'll accept that maybe there are things that move within those spaces which we don't fully comprehend. That's fine, like we'll accept that. Do I think it's possible then that those things can be good or bad, or maybe just even function according to the rules of a natural world where maybe they're not good or bad, but they're predators, right? So some of these things, they exist to feed off us. They exist to screw with us. They exist to, our existence is not necessarily incidental to them, but it's close enough. We're there, so they'll mess with us, they'll feed off us, whatever it is. But I don't think they're demons. I don't think they exist according to Christian theology. Because if these things exist, they've existed for as long as things have been around to exist, or things have been around to hassle. That predates, that's Christianity's 2,000 years old. There's no logic which allows for that particular take. If there are these unseen worlds, and if there is a consciousness that survives the point of physical death, man, I think it's probably so complex, or I should say, I think it is as unfathomable to us now as this world was to us in the womb. Like I just think that when you're in, obviously, an unborn child has no concept of what awaits it. Whatever minor dawning consciousness you might have in the final few months when your brain is developing, there's just no way you can possibly comprehend anything beyond what's right in front of you. And again, I think if there is a survival of consciousness past the point of physical death, it's going to be just as complex. And I think trying to put names on it like that it dumbs it down more than anything.
I think maybe that's that's what we do as human beings. We have to compartmentalize things to kind of to make them real and to understand them. I understand where you're coming from when it comes about the paranormal and about sort of experience. I mean, I've had experiences, and you've had experience. I want to ask you about your experience in a moment, but I've had experiences that I can't say what it was. I don't know if I imagined it. I don't know if it's something that I physically saw. I don't know if it's something that I kind of wanted to see and I kind of projected it with my mind. I was wide awake and I wasn't drunk. I wasn't under any influences or anything. I was just normal day and I saw stuff. And I've just wondered to myself, is that happening? Or am I the only person seeing it? Like when somebody sees a ghost, are they seeing something that's actually happening, or are they seeing something that only they can see? Are they tapping into something? And I think that with the paranormal, as we know, it doesn't happen to command. You go into a house that allegedly has paranormal phenomenon going on. The chances of you witnessing anything or seeing anything or experiencing anything is quite unlikely. And if you do, you're incredibly lucky. It's not something that happens all the time. One thing I will say is that I do believe that we as individuals have some form of collective consciousness, and that we are all connected in some way, either out there in the ether. There's some way that we're connected, some more connected than others. Your ability to open your mind and learn about things connects you, makes a stronger connection. I've been to places that have got lots of history, and I've had battles, and I've had feelings. I felt weird. I felt like I'm not the only person there, that stuff's happened, and it's not. I'm not psychic or anything, but I do feel that if you open yourself up to the unknown, then it will show itself to you in a more a freer way.
Yeah. I mean, most of my paranormal experiences have involved shadow people. Pinning that for a sec, I guess what I was trying to say earlier, and I realize I did that thing where I lost my own point because just my brain is stupid. But what I was saying was, I think taxonomy is necessary, right? Like, we have to assign names and terms to things in order to understand and try and tease apart their meanings. So I'm not opposed to saying, shadow people, dogman, things like that, because again, they're useful terms. I think what I was pushing back against was this notion that there are experts.
Yeah.
I don't think there are experts. I think anyone who comes to you and says, aha, that means this, I think they're, if you'll excuse me, talking out their ass. I think that was sort of what I was trying to get at, and just got distracted by my own words, which again, it happens. But yeah, so no, again, I think we have to sort things. In order to make sense of anything, we have to be able to assign names and types of things. But again, I think that the variations are much more finely detailed than demon. And again, I think if anyone tells you they're an expert, then they are probably trying to sell you something. But as far as the shadow people, my first ever paranormal experience was a shadow person. I didn't even know they existed at the time. I wasn't even familiar with the term. I had been researching my book, and I've written a book a long time ago now, Strange Little Place, it's called. The second edition actually just came out in, I think, 2022. I think that might have been when we spoke. But I was just collecting stories. Didn't believe any of it. It was just stories I was collecting. It was a cool thing to do, something to, try and commit to finishing a project for a change. And I got back from my first research trip. I was talking to someone at the office. It was a quiet day. We were the only two people around. And as we were having this conversation, I saw this all black head peek out from behind a coat rack in one of the offices. And it was just out of the corner of my eye, but I saw it. It was unmistakable. And it just held there long enough, almost like it was waiting for me to notice it, like just to make sure I could not write it off. And then it just went back behind the coat rack. And I nearly lost my fool mind. Because again, I'd had weird stuff happen, but I didn't really believe in the paranormal. Again, I was just collecting these stories as something to do. And so to see that was a complete upending of my view of the world. And I've had a handful of other encounters with them, but yeah, in late 2022, around the time you and I were speaking, again, I don't know if it was before or after we spoke, right. But I was out for a drive in Quebec with a friend of mine. I was living in Montreal at the time, and we drove through this little town on the river. And it had a strange vibe, and I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but it had a strange vibe. And we were just talking and driving and didn't think too much of it. So then my friend dropped me off at my apartment, and I went to bed. And now my apartment was very bright. It had their floor-to-ceiling windows, and I was facing the city, so it was never totally dark in there. So it wasn't like you would mistake a shadow for something. If there was going to be a shadow, it would be cast by something in front of the window, and there was nothing in front of the window, so it was just light coming in. And I had a nightmare. I remember waking up and thinking, whoa, that was terrible. And I opened my eyes and I rolled over on my side, and there was what looked like a cloaked figure standing over me in bed. And it wasn't sleep paralysis because again, I had moved in position to be able to see it. And I gasped. I remember I audibly gasped. And as I did, it's almost like whatever this thing was, that disturbed it or that surprised it, because it sucked back like the house in Poltergeist. Like it just, right, and it was gone.
Yeah.
But I saw it shrink. It wasn't like it disappeared. I saw it shrink away. And there was no follow-up, nothing happened after that, but it was unmistakable. And it had been years since I'd seen one of the shadows. Like I'd seen, again, a handful of them when I was younger, sort of in my early 30s, but nothing for a long time. And part of that, I think, is because when we first started recording the Ghost Story Guys, my original co-host and I, we were in an office building that was deeply, deeply haunted. Now, I don't know why it was haunted. I've talked to a handful of people who claim to be sensitives, who can maybe, divine a few more of these details. They claim that whatever we were dealing with there was more elemental. It wasn't a ghost per se. We were dealing with something that had never been human.
Mm-hmm.
But whatever these things were, they were very prevalent in this building. And so I think the amount of time I spent, A, working in that building, and then B, recording Ghost Story Guys there, really heavily sensitized me to this stuff. I do think there is something to that. I think if you are around it a lot, I think you become more tuned to it. And so I had a lot of experiences in and around that building. But when we lost that office, because the business I was working for that sort of sublet the space to us, basically they let me record in my office, we lost that space. They closed and they let the office go. So we moved the recording, and gradually as we moved the recording, things happened less. And I found it in my life as well. As I kind of, even though I was doing the show more, because we were not in what I think was a very challenging, like paranormally active space, I had fewer experiences. So to wake up and see that thing standing over me was a real shock, because I kind of thought the time of my life where I was having direct paranormal encounters had kind of passed.
When people have experiences, it's usually, not always, but usually they'll say, I'm having a bad time in my life, or I'm very stressed at the moment. And of course, there are skeptical people out there will say, well, that's because you're under a lot of pressure, or because you're going through whatever it might be. This is why you feel that you're having these experiences. But I do think that there is possibly a connection with when you're very stressed, you're very sort of you're worrying about stuff, and that you can have these experiences. And they might be negative, they might be positive, but I was going to pick up on what you just said there about a building and your old studio. I was told a story once of an individual that I got talking with, and they used to work in a house. Well, it was in a high street in a city. The buildings used to be in the olden days, the Victorian days. They used to be homes. They used to be homes where people would live, and there were servants that lived at the top of the house and all that kind of stuff. But obviously, in modern times, the houses have been converted, and a lot of the houses were converted. Downstairs were shop fronts, and upstairs were just storage, or they were flats or whatever. This one building where this individual worked, he worked with a team of people. It was like an insurance salesman. He was doing telesales and stuff like that. The first two floors, the downstairs was like a sales area, like a shop front. The upstairs was like a telesales area where they would do all their their phone sales and stuff. And then the other two floors above were just empty. There was nothing up there. But a lot of people complained. They didn't want to go. A lot of people wouldn't go up there because that's where the toilets were, and people didn't like going up there. They felt like they're being watched, they were being followed. There was something up there. It just felt a bit off. You got to remember these buildings were, it was a house, so those buildings had bedrooms and stuff up there and all the other stuff. But there was a kitchen up there, and there was a room where they would have their lunch and stuff. But it was all kind of empty. And they started to experience stuff. It started off where people saying that it felt a bit weird, and that there was something, odd noises. They say, I've heard a door shut or whatever. And then they would kind of forget about it and think, it's just imagine it. They came into work one day, and all of the taps upstairs in the bathroom were switched on, turned on, full blast. And they thought, okay, a bit weird. Maybe it's water pressure. Maybe, so they turned them all off, and that was that. And they forgot about it. Then they went back to work and all that. The following day, I think it was the following day or a few days later, this all happened over like a space for a few weeks. They come back to work, and one of the girls that opened up, she wouldn't go upstairs. She was in the office. She hadn't opened up or anything. She was completely petrified, and she said, I don't want to go up there. Someone needs to go up there and sort it out. There's a lot of noise going on. I don't want to go up there. So this chap that I know, he decided, this is just stupid. And he went upstairs, and I think he went up to the second floor where all the telesales things were, and all the chairs were up on the upon the desks.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, nobody at the end of the day had put them there. They weren't, like as you would put the desks, chairs up on the desk if you were going to vacuum or whatever. But they didn't do stuff like that. This was completely out of the blue. So something or someone had put all the chairs on the desks. Obviously, once again, he thought it was a prankster or whatever. Time went on. A few days went by, and this is the weirdest thing, right? In the downstairs, it was all like nice and carpeted, proper fitted carpet and everything. They came to work. It was a few days later. They came to work. They were amazed by what they saw. Something or somebody had literally pulled all of the carpet up off of the floor into the middle of the room, ripped all of the carpet up out, proper fitted carpet, ripped all of the carpet up and bunched it all up. This is a fully fitted carpet in a downstairs like office area, had just been bunched up in the middle of the room. They went to the radio. They called in a priest, and he came in and did his thing. He did his blessing and all that stuff. And it was a little while longer, but he left a little while after that. He'd had enough. He moved to do a different job. But it's amazing when I think about and I hear stories like that. And I knew this guy for many years, so I knew that he wasn't he wasn't sort of lying or whatever. I knew he was a legitimate person. But when I hear stories like that, I always think to myself, what happened in that building all those years ago? Because it was an old Victorian building. What happened? Something happened there. That energy that may be still there. It's manifesting. Something's happening to make that energy manifest. And the thing that you just said about seeing that shadow and being scared and stuff. I'm thinking if people are in a place and they're maybe stressed out or whatever, maybe they are triggering something. Maybe they give it an ability to manifest and be something. Whatever that might be. I don't like, as I say, I don't like saying ghost or poltergeist or whatever. But something happened in that building for those things to happen. I mean, it's in the local paper. They went to the radio. People came down and did a radio piece on it. Have you ever heard any local stories like that where you are?
Oh yeah. So when I'm recently moved to London, Ontario, so I'm still kind of getting the lay of the land here. Although don't let me forget to tell you, I did actually pick up a recent story from here. I'll tell you that one in a moment. But the carpet thing you said reminded me of a conversation I once had with a police officer. We have a surprising number of first responders who listen to our show, with sort of an emphasis on police, and we've actually done two different, we call them first responder versus the paranormal shows, where people will have sent in their stories of dealing with being like paramedics or police or firemen who've had sort of strange experiences. But this one officer I spoke to was telling me that he was in the town or the city of Surrey, which is a suburb of Vancouver, BC. And he was called to this apartment where a woman was outside with her baby, and she was panicked. And I guess what happened was she had put the baby to bed. Her husband was out at work, put the baby to bed, had gone to, do whatever it was she was doing. And a little while later, she went in to check on the baby. All of that unremarkable, except for the fact that the crib was resting on an area rug, quite a large area rug, because the room itself was uncarpeted. Mm-hmm. When she went back in after putting the baby to bed, that area rug was rolled up against the far wall. And now, in order for that to happen, someone would have had to have moved the crib, which would not have been, a quiet process, had to move it onto the hardwood floor, roll it up, put it against the wall, and move the crib back exactly where it had been, because she said the crib had not moved. But the rug had.
Yeah.
And so she grabbed the kid, got the hell out of there, called the cops, and, he went and checked the apartment. She locked it, I guess, when she left. He said the door was still locked. No one was in there. He checked, all the closets, checked all the rooms. So no explanation, but it happened. As you say, there's really no way to know, especially in an apartment setting, because you have so many different intersecting lives. It's impossible, I think, to chase down what exactly could be causing this, because it could have nothing to do with the history of the building. It could have something to do with any number of things, right? Yeah. Because we don't really know where any of this comes from. But in terms of the bad, like having a bad time and how that can affect your experience of these things, my own experiences have kind of been across different times in my life. There doesn't seem to be any one, it's not like I'm having a really great time and so when that's happening, I don't see the paranormal. Actually, if anything, it seems to be if I'm having a bad time, if I'm going through like a period of low mental health, which happens, I actually seem to have fewer experiences. And I don't know exactly why, but there does seem to be some correlation there. But something you said that reminded me of this is I know a guy back in Victoria where my wife lives, and he once told me that, his wife once told me that she knows when he's going through a period of high stress because the closet in their room shakes when he's asleep.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So they were very, they're a professional, like high functioning professional couple. On the surface, you would never expect to have this conversation with them. It was actually a random chance that we happened to be in a completely different city at the same time. It was just one of those things that we were in a hotel bar having this conversation. And yeah, she shared that. She said, I know if he's stressed and he's not telling me, because when he's asleep, the closet door will shake.
Do you think in some way that we can become psychically connected to the things around us that we use every day?
Honestly, I don't know. I truly believe we can become connected to other people that we're around a lot. For example, I have a very good friend of mine. When we first became friends, there's that when you first become friends with someone, there can be that very intense period of bonding where you're kind of getting to know each other.
Yeah.
And so we actually, at one point, we had this conversation, and I said, I had this crazy dream last night where I was in a bus station, and I was looking at going to one place or another, and I saw you in line for a bus. And they gave me the craziest look. And they said, okay, so you're not going to believe this, but last night I had a dream I was taking a bus somewhere. I was waiting in this big city bus station for a bus. They didn't see me, but either that is the most incredible coincidence you can imagine, or for a very brief period, we were so in tune with one another that we shared a dream. And I was speaking to this person recently, and they're working a new job. And where they're working, they have a coworker who is, they spend the whole day together. That's just the nature of the job. And they said that one night, the same thing happened. Their coworker said, "Oh man, I dreamed about X, Y, and Z," and that my friend said, "Oh, okay, because I had a dream I saw you doing X, Y, and Z." So now I'm not going to pretend to understand by what mechanism that happens, but that happens. And this is something I've mentioned in Strange Little Place, and something that is specific to the second edition, where I had a very vivid dream, which I won't get into here because it's quite a lengthy story, but I had a very vivid dream about a valley outside my hometown that doesn't actually exist. And I sort of fixed it, because in the dream I had a very specific idea of where I was before I went down into the valley. I recall looking at the city from a distance. I was atop a hill. I was into the, I want to say, northwest of town. And in the dream, I recall saying to myself, I see the road in front of me descends out of view, and then in the distance it joins back up with my hometown, but there are only 4 roads in and out of my hometown, and the one I'm looking at is not any of those. So again, dream, okay, fine. But then I was having a conversation with a friend of mine who also grew up there, and he told me about this fantasy valley he dreams of. And when he explained the location to me, I realized his fantasy valley, his dream valley that does not actually exist, was in the same location as mine. And there have been a handful of other occasions where we've talked to people, or where I have talked to people, and there are these strange commonalities in dreams. For example, there's a famous haunted house in Revelstoke, which is my hometown in Western Canada. If you ask anyone about haunted houses, it's the house they always talk about. And I've talked to a handful of people who all had the same dream, that there was a garage on one side of the house, but in real life, there has never been a structure there. But a number of different people have imagined or dreamt of a garage there, and all of them, there's 3 different people, have all dreamed about there being bodies either buried under the garage or stored in the garage. But again, there's no connection. These dreams happened across 3 different time periods, but each of them match up in the details. And again, I don't pretend to understand why, but I always refer to it as the dream geography of Revelstoke. And I guess it raises the question: are different people just coincidentally having the same dreams? Is there something about that place that inspires these things, or is there another layer? Like I talked about, an unseen world, different layers to the world. Is there another layer where there is something there? It's impossible to know, but it's the kind of stuff I'd love to speculate about.
I'll tell you a little story. It won't take long. I won't go on a tangent here, but I'll just tell you a little story.
Okay.
It's relevant to what you've picked up on, and it kind of flows on quite nicely. Elderly couple, they live in a house in the country, and they just never had anything weird happen to them. Just another day doing their thing, and they go to bed. They're woken early in the morning. I think the wife wakes and she tells her husband, wake up, there's someone outside. And they're in like a country village, so there's not many houses around. She's worried someone's trying to break into the house, so the husband's like, I'll have a look. So he opens the window, front of the house, because they're at the front of the house, opens the window, looks down, can't see anyone, but he can hear someone walking around outside the house. And he thinks, I'm not having this. He walks out onto the landing, and he can see what he thinks is a person through the glass of the door, walking around out front of their door. And then all of a sudden, knock, 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 someone's knocking on the door. And he's thinking, well, it's like, who's knocking on my door? And he waits for a moment, and the person's still out there, knocks on the door again. You can hear them walking around, you can hear their shoes on the gravel and stuff. And then he sort of hears them sort of walk away. And he walks to the door, and he thinks, that's it, I'm going to open the door and find out what's going on. He opens the door. No one there, completely silent. No trace of anyone, just completely silent. And he's like, well, how bizarre. That's just weird. So he closed the door, comes back upstairs, says to his wife, whoever it was, they're gone. There's no one there. I've walked to the end of the drive. I can't see anyone. And remember, they're in the middle of nowhere, so they can see around. So they go back to bed. I go back to sleep. Next day comes. They get up and they're having their breakfast, normal day, read the paper or whatever. Midday comes and they get a knock at the door. We go to the door, open the door, and there's a young gentleman there. Well, maybe middle-aged, youngish, 30s, 40s. And he introduces himself and he says, is there any chance I can come and have a look round? And they're like, well, who are you, He said, well, I used to live here when I was a young boy. This was my parents' home. But I never remember it. I would always just like to come back, and I'm visiting in the area, and I just thought I'd, like to come and have a look round. Seems genuine. They let him in, and he walks around and said, I used to play here. This used to be my room, and I remember seeing my parents, and we used to sit in the room and watch telly and stuff. And they sat down. He said, can I tell you something? I said, yeah, sure. He said, last night I had the most crazy dream. I had a dream that I came to this house, and it was all locked up. And I walked up the driveway, and I was knocking on the door. And I couldn't get any answer, so I decided to leave and walk off.
Oh, wow.
Did he visit that house in his dream?
It reminds me of something I heard about on a podcast a long time ago. I don't listen to the show anymore, so I won't name it, but they were doing an episode where they went through this dream journal the guy had published. Basically, he had kept a dream journal for years and years and years, and he would make notations when things cropped up that seemed to be accurate, or would resemble real life events. And there was one that jumped out at me that reminds me of this, where he dreamed that he traveled to his girlfriend's house, but when he got to her house, there were vampires everywhere. And he didn't go in because he was afraid, but he didn't know what to do. There was just what you imagine to be vampires, kind of bulk standard, stereotypical vampires everywhere. And he called her right away the next morning. He said, "Hey, how you doing?" He didn't want to tell her why he was concerned. She goes, "Oh, I'm fine." He asked her what she'd gotten up to last night, and she had been up late watching a vampire movie.
Interesting.
And I do think this is a thing with dreams. I think there is such a function of metaphor that it's hard to directly sometimes correlate dreams to reality, because I think there has to be this element of interpretation. I do think dreams can tell us things about what is to come, Not always, but I think it's possible. But I think what happens is we are imperfect machines kind of interpreting difficult to understand data. So I think in this, I wonder if in this case, he went there, in some fashion, maybe not actually flying there, but that's how he sort of interpreted the experience. But what he sort of interfaced with her to some degree, but, she was watching this particular thing. And so that's how he visually interpreted the information he was getting.
In my teenage years, I went through a bout of sleepwalking. It lasted for maybe a few months. My mum took me to the doctors, because she thought I was, I was going a bit loopy, but the doctor was like, "Look, that's what happens. Some kids, it happens, But she was more worried that I was going to walk out the front door and wander off and walk down the main road or whatever.
Sure.
What was amazing, I've got no memory of walking around the house at night, direct memory. I don't remember waking up or walking around the house or looking at things or anything. But my mum used to find me in all different places in the house. And at the time, our house was quite large. And she would find me sometimes in the kitchen, like moving pots around and stuff. Or she would find me downstairs in the corner, mumbling, as if I'm having a conversation with somebody, but I'm looking at the wall. And then she would call my name and I would turn around and walk back upstairs. I'm asleep. My eyes are closed. My brain has mapped that house out to an inch because every foot, I've never tripped up anything. This is amazing. This is how amazing I think our minds are, our brains, how we physically. And that house was obviously mapped in my mind because my eyes were closed. My mum was looking at me. She said, "You were asleep every time. You were fast asleep." One time I was basically in the front room, sat on the sofa as if I were like watching telly or whatever. But the room was in darkness. And my mum came into the room and called my name, and I got up and started to walk to her. And obviously she walked back upstairs into my bedroom and told me to get back in bed. But I could hear. So obviously I was hearing. I was hearing what she was saying. And I was responding. But my eyes were closed. And I think that in that state, where your body is still, in some way your body is still functioning, and you're still able to understand language. And it's just... That's amazing. To start with, that's amazing. So when you go to the realms of you have a dream, I think I've been there, or I dreamt this, there's always a possibility that in some way are able to tap into something when we're not conscious, don't you think?
Oh, yeah, 100%. I mean, there's two examples that occur to me. So one, further to the idea that, you are imperfectly receiving information from outside yourself. I just remembered when in 2018, I took my mother down to the U.S. She'd never been before. And so we went down we flew into Las Vegas, and then we rented a car, and I took her over to L.A. She'd never been to L.A. Prior to leaving, we were in the hotel in the town where we flew out of. And I had a dream where a bunch of me and my friends were sitting around, we're getting ready to watch a movie, and there was this famous actress who was going to watch it with us. And I remember in the dream thinking, well, this is weird, but she's here. Okay, we'll watch this movie. Now, I don't normally dream about famous people. It's just not a thing I do. But in 2018, after when we finally got to LA, one night I went down to the ArcLight on Sunset. I think it's on Sunset Boulevard, which is a movie theater I used to like going to. I think it's closed now, but they've got the big Cinerama Dome. It was a really cool theater. And I was going to see Mad Max Fury Road, the black and white version that they put out. So I bought my ticket, climbed the stairs towards the particular cinema I was heading to. As I did, I passed a crowd of people, and I thought, well, what's going on? And I looked, and there was a premiere happening. And who was standing 15 feet away from me was the actress I'd had that dream about. So she was there attending the premiere of one of her own films. And I think what happened was, again, I think this was an example of my consciousness receiving data and interpreting it the best way it knows how. So it somehow knew, who knows how, that I was going to, in a film context of people watching a movie together, I was going to see this person. So it interpreted the way that, how would I see that? Well, I'd be watching a movie with my friends, and this person would be there. Well, in this case, I was going to see a movie, and she was there watching a movie with a bunch of, not friends, but a bunch of press who were going to see it. But again, it's either an incredible coincidence, or I had some indication mentally that this was going to happen. And again, I don't really believe in coincidence.
Maybe the records of everything that has happened and everything that will happen in some way is in the ether somewhere, and that we are able to tap into it a bit and pick up on fragments of it. Yeah,
that's it. And I mean, again, if it had been a different actress, I could say, okay, well, you just had a dream, whatever. And you're in LA, you're going to movie theaters, you're going to run into people. I mean, my wife once bet me money. She said, I will bet you dinner that you will see The Rock while you're there. Because my wife always jokes that when I go places, I'll run into famous people, and she never does. So it's a sort of running joke between us. And I did. I was going to see a movie, and the gala premiere of Moana was happening. And so just, I don't know, 30 feet away from me across the street, there he was. So, I like to joke that, that's how The Rock cost me dinner. But again, I don't think that was a psychic thing. I think that was just, okay, what are the odds, right? But the fact that I dreamed about this one particular actress and she was, right there, I mean, it was all internally generated, I think seems telling to me in a different way. And further to that, not quite dreams, but along the same lines of being connected and sort of this idea of like the mass collective unconscious. I remember one time, this is almost 10 years ago now, I came to bed, and I'm a night guy. My wife's an early person. I'm a late person. So I came to bed. She was already in bed. I curled up next to her, and I was having this sort of conversation in my head. And like how you do, right? Just sort of sussing out the day and trying to make sense of things. And at one point, something came up where the voice I was kind of talking to in my head wasn't really my own voice. But again, that's not uncommon, right? Which is not to say I hear voices. This is just the thing your brain does as it packs away the events of the day. But the voice in my head, I said, like, okay, I'm going to do this thing. And the voice in my head said to my wife, it said, and you're okay with that? And my wife replied out loud.
Wow. So it kind of psychically,
yeah,
that's weird.
Yeah. I was just laying, again, had my arm around her. This voice says, and you're okay with that? And my wife just sort of sleepily mumbled, uh-huh.
Saying that, you've obviously experienced this. I know many people experience this. When you think of someone, their name or their face comes into your head, and within a few moments, the phone rings, and it's them on the other end of the line, or they knock on your door, or they walk around the corner. Some people say, "Oh well, you've already seen them, and your brain is catching up," but you don't see them. The phone rings, and it's them on the end of the phone, and you think, "Oh my God, 1 second ago, I just thought of you."
Oh yeah, well, I mean that happened recently because Paul and I record Ghost Story Guys every Thursday. We record every Thursday, depending on which show we're recording. We sometimes record at different times, but we always record every Thursday. And I was actually at McDonald's getting some lunch, and we weren't going to be recording for several hours yet. So I was in McDonald's getting lunch, and all of a sudden in my head, it was similar to the experience I had with my wife. In my head, I was talking to Paul, and I was telling him, don't worry about it. It's fine. We'll figure it out. Whatever it is, we'll figure it out. If we have to record another day, we'll record another day. It's not a big deal. Like my schedule is flexible. I'll accommodate you. And I got my sandwich, and I ate my sandwich, and I didn't think much of it. Half an hour later, I had a message from him saying, hey man, I pulled my back. I don't know if I'm going to be able to record today. And I told him, same thing. It was exactly the conversation I imagined having, but it was my side of it. I didn't have his side of it. But I was saying, and I told him the same thing. Yeah, okay, well, that sucks. It's fine. We'll record whatever. If we can't record today, we'll record tomorrow or Saturday. Not a big deal. But, and sure, now you could say you're going to hear from Paul. I know I'm going to hear from Paul because it's Thursday. Usually I'll get a message from him such and such time saying, all right, I'll see you then. But for whatever reason, this day, I had this thought, okay, yep, if you're not able to record, not a big deal. We'll figure it out. And yeah, minutes later, not minutes later, but yeah, 30, 40 minutes later, that was the message I got. So, yeah, it's definitely happened. And I what I've noticed is it seems to happen, I think, in moments where you're not trying to do these things.
Yeah.
I had this experience a long time ago, and I might have told you this on the last time we spoke, but on another trip to LA, actually it was my first ever trip to LA in 2015, I spent a lot of time in the Comedy Store when I'm in LA. I don't even really go to shows so much. I just like hanging out at the bar out front because you never know who you're going to see. You just kind of watch the world go by. But on this particular occasion, I wanted to go see Roast Battle, which at that time was really having a moment at the Comedy Store. It might still be, I don't know. I'm not as connected to that as I once was, but I really wanted to go check it out. But I was staying in a motel in downtown LA, and it was going to be about a 30-minute drive to get to the Comedy Store. So I thought, okay, I better go do that. I better go now. And I was by myself in this hotel room, and for whatever reason, I could not motivate myself out the door. I couldn't do it. Couldn't get myself to leave the hotel room. Didn't matter what I incentivized myself with. My brain was just, nope, we're not going. So eventually I gave up. I thought, okay, well, the heck with this. I ordered a pizza and had a nice conversation with the pizza guy and watched a movie in my room. Well, that night, when Roast Battle got out, there was a shooting right in front of the Comedy Store at the front bar where I usually hang out. And again, you can say coincidence, and very possibly so. But I've talked to a few people who, again, are more sensitive than I. They made the point to me. They said, well, have you noticed that this happens when you have quiet, you have time, and you're not thinking about it?
Yeah, a clear mind.
Yeah, it's almost like the subliminal thoughts can kind of surface. And I sometimes wonder that about things like, things like enchantment. I kind of wonder if we're talking about stuff like the Fae or, there are a lot of different phenomena that involve missing people. I think there's an element of this. I think there's an element of like distraction. If you are free from distraction, that's when these things can kind of enter your awareness.
People who go into the wilderness and seem to vanish, and not all of those people have accidents. They just seem to slip off the face of the earth. I find that incredibly unsettling.
Oh yeah. I joke about it a lot on Ghost Story Guys. I don't go into the woods, and part of that's just because I'm a city slicker, right? I'm not set up for the woods. Even though I grew up in the woods, but I distinctly remember this one time. Again, my wife and I went out hiking, which is not something we ordinarily do. We're not really those people, but there is a ghost town on Vancouver Island out in the woods. It was called Leechtown. So we wanted to go check it out, and it's about a 45-minute walk, maybe an hour walk from the furthest point of this campsite, and then you just keep walking down this trail. And we got out there, and what was interesting is we both had this feeling of that we should not be out of each other's sight for more than a moment. And it was just, again, the stray thought, but I do wonder if the fact that we were out there in the woods where there's no distraction, there's nothing pulling your focus, I wonder if that allows you to connect more clearly to your instinct and to feel things, to feel danger, to feel, whatever's happening. And again, I think the fact that we both, and my wife is she's way more into the outdoors than I am. She's not really much of a hiker, but she still likes being out in the forest, whereas I don't do that at all. But even she had this notion that, no, we need to keep each other in sight, or if not in sight, we can't be out of sight for more than, 30 seconds to a minute. And it was just a fascinating thing that, again, could have just been, a folie à deux kind of thing where we're both winding each other up. Maybe there's some perception of something otherwise invisible when you are just allowed time to sort of settle and enter that almost like a meditative state that nature kind of allows you to be in.
I don't know what it is with the missing 411 stuff, but I've read quite a lot about it and I've watched all the docs that are out there, and I just find it unsettling. I know that there are a large portion of the cases can be explained where people have sadly, gone into the wilderness and had an accident, or they've been attacked by wild animals, or they've just something unfortunate has happened to them and they've later been found. But there are cases out there where people there's no explanation, they just vanish. And I mean, one of the stories that stays with me is a couple were going for a walk and they were walking on a trail, and a young lady ran past them. She was doing her, obviously, running. She had all her running gear on, and they watched her run up the trail, and the trail at the end kind of went round the corner. But just before she got to the corner, they watched her stop, and at either side of the trail there was a tree line. She kind of stopped as if something had caught her attention, and she walked off to the left-hand side of the trail and into the trees slightly, the tree line, and she didn't come back out. And of course the couple walked up to where this woman was when she stopped, and they thought, well, let's have a quick look, see if we can see her, because she hasn't come back out. It's just woods, can't get in there. It's thick forest. She was gone. There's no trace of her. She just seemed to have vanished into thin air. There's many cases like that where people just have been there 1 minute and then somebody's turned around and looked back and they're gone. And it's just very unsettling, where people also say that they're in the forest and it's almost like all the animals stop singing and doing their thing in it, and it all goes deadly quiet. It's almost like something has arrived.
I don't think we necessarily give the woods their due in terms of like their potential danger, right? Especially if you don't really know it well. I think it's easy to say, oh, I'm just walking. What could go wrong? I mean, the same is true for the desert. As I mentioned earlier, we had Derek and David on our show, and they were talking about how in the desert it seems very simple to walk a mile into the desert, but to walk back it can be a very different thing depending on a bunch of different things that could possibly happen to you. And I think it's true for the forest. I think it's just easy to not respect nature and kind of end up afoul of either an animal or, getting yourself hurt or falling down. But that said, I do think there is something else happening in a lot of these cases. And I mean, I had my own experience. And again, it's hard for me to remember what I've talked about on to you and what I haven't, Reeves. But there was an occasion in 2008 where a friend and I were down in the redwoods. There's a redwood forest down in Northern California. And it was early morning. We pulled over by the side of the road because we had never seen anything like the redwoods before. It was our first trip down there. We were just awed by this place. And my friend, a month before, maybe a month and a half before, had been in a very nearly fatal car crash. So he had nearly died. 2 people involved did die. Him and his family barely survived. So he had suffered abdominal trauma, and he was healed enough that we could take this trip. But the doctor said, you cannot do anything strenuous. You cannot climb anything. You cannot, nothing like that. Just drive, eat food, look at things, take pictures, drive some more. So when we pulled over by the side of the road, he was a professional photographer, and so he wanted to take really high quality photos, and I just kind of wanted to take my crappy photos, whatever. So I was wandering a little ways away from the car. And after a while, I thought, okay, well, we should get back to the car. So I walked back up the road to where we had parked. The car was there. He wasn't. Now, the forest floor was about, I want to say 8 to 10 feet down, not a steep embankment, but also not a gentle slope. And I started calling his name. Eventually, I heard him call back to me from the forest. And I said, what the hell are you doing out there, man? And he said, well, where are you? I said, I'm back at the road. Get back here now. And so he came back, and I helped him back up the grade. And I said, what are you crazy? What are you doing? You're not supposed to be climbing. This is possibly the dumbest thing you've ever done. And that's a statement. And he said to me, well, I heard you calling me. So I thought you were out there. And I said, no, I was up here. And of course, in my head, when we wrote this off at the time, oh, he must have heard me calling for him. And because of the forest or whatever, the sound just kind of bounced around. It sounded like it was coming from the trees. Whatever, fine, okay. But it was only when I got into things like Missing 411 that I realized that I didn't start calling his name until after he'd wandered out into the forest. So what the hell called to him with my voice?
There are lots of people have said that they've been out in the wilderness and they've heard people calling them and calling their names and their name from inside the forest or from inside the wilderness or from wherever they might be. And it's I don't know. That's once again that's why I find it so scary. What is that? What is that? It's absolutely crazy. I can't think of anything else more scary than being somewhere that you're not too sure about and have someone call your name.
Sure. And I think also there's the notion of not being top of the food chain. If you are open to the possibility, because again, I I started off the show being very skeptical, and I know that. But I do that because I really passionately believe in the reality of a lot of this stuff, and I get annoyed when people distract from that with nonsense. And so I truly believe that there is a layer to the world out there where there are things which have a much greater understanding of us than we do of them. And again, I think not all of them have our best interest at heart. And, I believe in the possibility of the jinn, of the fae, of civilizations parallel to ours, which are just beyond our understanding. I like to joke, again, it's another running joke on the podcast, that I don't like to talk about the good folk very much. And it's not entirely true, but there is some truth there in that when we first started the show, my first co-host and I, our 27th episode, I think it's called In the Land of the Fairy, the Digression is King. And I made some very, very poorly conceived jokes on the topic of the good folk. And we had so many freaking problems with electronics, with my voice. My voice started going wonky. It persisted for days afterwards, for shows afterwards. And it became this running joke that we had upset someone. And I made the mistake, because sometimes, Reeves, I am dumb and it takes me a while to learn these things, that I did it again on episode, I think it was 80 or 81, which was The Haunting of Ireland. We had some stories kind of revolving around the good folk. And the same thing happened. I made some, poorly timed remarks, and I had hassle. And I have since learned I just don't do that. And again, I think there is something to it. I think it is possible there are things out there which are much more capable of viewing us than we are of them. And I think that we're better off not screwing around in their domain and not screwing with them directly. Because I don't think we have the capacity to fight back. I think we are at their mercy to a certain degree. And that's, like, not the dead. I don't think the dead have any power over us. If consciousness survives the point of physical death, I don't think it can really physically hurt us the way they can in movies. But I think these other people, I don't even know that they necessarily can affect us physically, but I think they can have a much more profound mental effect on us. And I think that is, it's a frightening thing. Because again, a bear, fine. There are strategies for dealing with a bear. You know what a bear is, you kind of know how to deal with it. But if you're talking about an opponent that can see you, but you can't see them, and you can't even fathom what they might want, that's a paralyzingly frightening thought.
Brennan, you don't mess with the fairies.
No.
You don't mess with the fairies, because they muck you up bad. Honestly, I've heard some weird stories regarding experiences of the little people. I've heard some weird stories. I don't know what they're seeing and what they're experiencing, but they're definitely seeing and experiencing something. And it's, just give it a little bit of respect. I don't understand it, so I'll give it a little bit of respect. I'm not going to say it's a lot of old nonsense, because I'm not going to say that. But maybe that's a topic for another episode, because we have come to the end of this episode. But I think what we're going to do is we're going to get you back, and we're going to do a topic on fairy lore and fairy folk, because I think that would make a very good conversation.
Well, I mean, I would love to, although I would also recommend, if you're going to have someone on to talk about the fairies, have you listened to Joe Hickey Hall's show?
Yes, I have. I do subscribe to her podcast. I do need to send her a message and see if she'll come on and tell me some of her experiences, because she does a very interesting podcast. I got to say, thumbs up for that podcast. I really do enjoy it.
Yeah, I mean, Joe's show has really it's been one of the things that's allowed me to transition from a place of fear to a place of respect with the fairy folk, with the good folk. I sort of, again, for a long time, it was always a place of fear. I just won't talk about this thing. But something about listening to her show has kind of allowed me to at least reach an equilibrium with it. I'm very careful, as you can hear, as your listeners will no doubt hear, but I don't have the same fear, but that I just have a healthy respect.
So before I close out this episode, what have you got lined up for shows, but also have you got any projects in the make?
Oh yeah. So I mean, Ghost Story Guys is always a going concern. It's a weekly show. Comes out every Tuesday. Me and Paul Bestall. Paul also hosts Mysteries and Monsters, and we tell first-person stories of encounters with the paranormal. Our most recent episode was sort of dealing with topics tangentially related to this, with this things like foreboding or premonition, and keeping yourself safe by listening to your instincts. We have a number of stories about that. But also, I'm working on another project, and unfortunately, I can't get into the details of it right now because we're still pitching it to networks. But I am working on a daily storytelling show with Brandon Scheck-Snyder, host of Southern Gothic, and that show will be all I can say is it's going to be a daily show. There will be 2 stories per day, 5 days a week for a year, at the very least. And again, I've written the first month. Basically, I'm going to be writing about 12 books over the course of the next year, Reeves. It's an intense commitment, but Brandon is an incredible storyteller. He'll be telling the stories, I'll be writing them, and both with a combination of his voice and his production acumen, it's already sounding like an incredible show. So again, I can't really talk about that yet, but hopefully when it launches, we'll be able to have a conversation about that. And again, thinking probably towards the middle of the year is realistically when we're going to be able to go live with that.
That sounds like it's going to be rather interesting. But anyway, thanks for joining me, Brennan. Thanks for coming on this episode. And you will be back because we always have a good conversation. Thanks for everybody for listening. If you have stayed right to the end, do give this show a like and a share if you're able to. And remember that if you've got any comments or ideas or feedback, you can always get in touch on the Paratalk website. But until the next episode, thanks again, Brennan. And thanks for everybody listening. And talk to you soon.